an attempt to question how do we interpret what kind of architecture do we decide, and how do we decide the ways we decide to preserve. So the project was basically a war. I set up a war zone where the viewers had to split up in two groups, and they were given guns, paintball guns, and they could play war. And each side was supporting one kind of architecture. It was a very simplified way of understanding architecture. What is being preserved on the one side, what is being preserved by the mainstream institutions, which is the town hall, municipality, and on the other side, what is not preserved and what could possibly be preserved. So what I was trying to in a way to negotiate, to question in this project was somehow, why do we have to preserve anything? I mean, what's the reason to in a way to throw money and preserve anything? Why do we need history? Why do we need something that portrays our identity? Let's say buildings from the 1930s, this is how Nicosia used to be, this is what Nicosia is. Why does that have to be, and not buildings from the 2000s? And this is like a simple question. I didn't come up with an answer, and I didn't want to come up with an answer. Also following the futurist way of why do we need history? It's a very simple question. Why do we need monuments?
Yeah, it's like so. So on that, like, okay, so where can you where do you see Nicosia being at the moment in terms of like public art beyond monuments? Like, through that work, what came up was kind of a resistance to both sides. Like with your vines, like, okay, you use something and you reuse it until it becomes so kind of everyday, even though it has a potential thing. But
it was a resistance to monumental way of monumental public art. And that's why through that, and even before that, I've been trying to utilize public conditions that would possibly provide an environment to have public art, but not in a monumental way. I've been for years a very fanatic football fan, and that has given me various opportunities, like to even through celebrations, even through calamities in a football way, to violate the space or to like celebrate a win or like winning the championship, and this mass use of the public space, which is hysterical. I mean, it's out of any rational thinking of using the space. Just people just go out on the streets, and all of a sudden something that's a bench becomes a wall that you write a graffiti. Something that's a wall becomes a floor because people start climbing. All of a sudden you start realizing that you can interpret the space that's provided to you, regardless to whether it has any monumental value. This reinterpretation, I find it very interesting. I find that there you actually, and in reality, you negotiate with the space, and there is an absolute evaporation of the distinction between subject and object.
Through that, like, because I know, but people don't know, like, to return to the kind of what I was asking at the beginning, like, we're kind of taking into consideration all that they do exist in Nicosia, but we tend to not classify them as public art. Probably because it forces us to engage with it, or we don't classify that as monumental because it forces us to engage with it, it's not on TV. Like, what kind of our expectations as kind of cultural practitioners, or whatever the term might be, to have from a city like Nicosia, because I think every city probably has different conditions and things, but for its kind of public art, like how can Nicosia, what can we what can we expect from Nicosia in terms of public art?
Well, I guess we have to define first of all what public art is. It's a very simple question.
Okay.
I mean, it's a simple question to state, but of course it's not very easy.
So what is it?
I don't know.
I'm sorry.
You are the academics.
I was wondering if public art is not in one way public art is not just that art that forces the public to engage with the public space more than anything else.
It's a matter of expectations.
So
and what the expectations are. So maybe the expectations need some sort of egging along, or they need to be they need to start coming out of a reaction. Maybe we need more vulgarity, for instance.
I would say, yeah, I mean, following that, I would say that public art, in the way you defined it, is the challenge to surpass the limitations of the public space, to surpass the codes of behavior with the public space. So in that way, that's the expectation of how do you use a public space. You have codes how to use it, but.
Is that public art or is that public architecture? I'm sorry, I have to.
Yeah, but that's interesting.
Well,
I mean, that's civic engagement.
it is civic engagement.
But is there a difference?
I mean,
Is there an actual real difference? I'm just asking. I'm just
No.
because the
But
whole
that's
thing
the
is about
general-
redefining that. So.
But it's also about, as you said, it's about interpretation, right? And so it's how you utilize it. I mean, you asked the question earlier about why do we need history, why do we need monuments? That's two very separate questions.
I
They're
guess
very
trying to
separate
merge them in one is why do we need history through public monuments?
Well, you
Because
see in Cyprus, I think those two kind of topics
Merge
sometimes
together.
they kind of merge because you have a very strong element of monumentalism and history intertwined. So I think that's why.
Well, the monumentalism is then an interpretation of that history,
Yeah.
which again is still a very separate question than why one needs history in general. And if you
Yeah, I mean,
if you muddy those waters too, I mean, certainly all the fields are changing and the boundaries are getting redefined, but if you completely mesh those two together in the same question, you're denigrating any value to history, or as they say, those who forget history are condemned to repeat it. So, but the monumentalism and that presentation of a specific aspect of history is really quite a different and very interesting thing to wrestle with, and especially in relationship to public art and new public art as we keep moving towards these iconic works that we can't seem to shake, and then you're going sort of in a different conversation.
yeah, but taking on from what I mean, just looking at that, like this is probably history and monumentality kind of merging, well, at least in the like what I always talk about everything, like it's a very kind of very close relationship. So in a sense, is how can we, not how, it's like, do we really have to move on from that? Or can we just go on and just change the shape and the form and the content? Or do we kind of embrace different forms of monumentality, which probably, they look more like public architecture, but they are really art because they deal with, what has been described as a kind of division of the sensible, like you kind of deal with exclusions and you kind of rebel against certain kind of narratives and stuff like that. Isn't that, no?
Well, but it's interesting if you think of how that monument was even developed. Who commissioned it? Who paid for it? You go to Trafalgar Square and you see those different plinths and how those were actually put through public subscription, not government subscription, which then you have a really interesting different conversation. And the whole reason that we have the empty fourth plinth is because nobody could get any money to change it, or, you know, which then I mean, the potential for this space, you know, can then become really interesting in that way, so that you have that balance between the permanent that you can have a conversation about now, 20 years from now, 100 years from now, and the memory of what happens in these spaces, which is part of what you're dealing with the archive. And so I don't think it's mutually exclusive. I think there's a place for everything.
Exclusive, but when something is susceptible to erosion, then it becomes interesting from the minute that you at least suspect that a crack is about to appear. And your example of Trafalgar Square, unfortunately to me, at any rate, does not apply here, because a lot of that it becomes, for whatever reason, whether we like it or agree with it or disagree with it, it becomes a purely political conversation, argument, where politics has also been, this is, okay, a bit of a segue, but I do digress, but what Kostis was talking about is also manifested in the way people deal with politics, presidential elections. You know, you've got the supporters of one side, supporters on the other side, and they actually vote as if they are participating, or they're not, because they're not participating, as if they are sitting in the bleachers, sitting in the seats, and cheering for their own.